Well, hello everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of the Inworld Review, the place where we bring you discussion about news and happenings and other things, really, open-ended discussion about the metaverse, the world of open social worlds and interactive spaces. Always a different definition to come up with, but that's it for this week. Right. Now, first of all, I'd like to introduce the folks that are here. Apart from me, I'm Mal Burns. On my right, I've got regular James Atloud, who's also running all our cameras for us while talking. So welcome, James.
Oh, thank you, Mel. It's a pleasure to be here.
And on my left, it's another familiar face to many of you, I'm sure. It's none other than John Lester, Pathfinder Lester, most of us call him. From here, there, and everywhere, really. So welcome, Path.
Oh, thanks. Great to be here.
And we were due to have another guest today, but unfortunately, there's somebody who's been moving to an obscure place on the planet and has ended up with a broken microphone and no way of replacing it. So they'll be on next week or another week. But we thought we'd carry on with Pathfinder because find out what's been going on there, a few interesting things, and just sort of have a little conversation about the state of the metaverse and everything, really. Because there have been quite a lot of issues and stuff coming up recently, and both I and James have some, points to raise. Anyway, diving in at the deep end, so to speak, though, with, as I said, welcome, Path. Maybe a little update of what you've been up to. The most topical thing I know that you mentioned is that you have had a little snoop around in this mysterious place called Sansar, Linden Labs' latest product.
Yeah, sure.
How do you find it?
Well, a few things. First, it's I would encourage everybody to log in and reserve an avatar name for themselves, and you can do that. You don't need VR goggles to use Sansar. You can just log in using the desktop client. Granted, there is no Mac client, but you can log in with the Windows client on your desktop and reserve your name. And one of the key things is, kind of like how slurls work in Second Life with Sansar, you register an account and then you create worlds basically with your account, and each of those worlds can have a unique URL. So you can give people a URL to go and check out your your Sansar build. Yeah. And all of those different worlds, though, are in the URL. I can't remember what it is. It's something like something.sansar.com/something/your avatar name / the world name. So so in terms of branding, also, like I was thinking, people, like you, Mal, you've got for your organization for Metaworld. Metaworld Broadcasting, you might want to reserve that as an avatar name, because just for branding, you could say, here are all the, you'd have your URL, blah, 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 /Metaworld Broadcasting /Studio1 /Studio2 /Studio3 or whatever.
Oh. Now, I actually have reserved, my avatar name and username is Mal Burns, of course.
Yeah.
And it is actually important to do both, because once your actual identity and your screen, other people can share your name on screen, but they can't be the same actual identity, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So you have to do that. But I must admit, when I saw it, I thought, well, they'll know my name. I'll use my name.
There's nothing. You can have multiple accounts too. That's the thing. I think there's a little bit of a land grab in terms of just names right now. And and people should make sure you grab your avatar name, and also any kind of organization, that's associated with whatever you're doing. So even something like the Great Canadian Grid, maybe you could register that as an avatar name. So then you could build worlds using that avatar, but in the URL it would be branded as Great Canadian Grid.
I would probably it's a good point. I'll probably do the same Metaworld, because I got my own. I got my own private grid offline, like you have Pathfinder, which is Metaworld.
Yeah.
So it's on the hypergrid, but it's sort of semi-private. Yeah, so it'd be. I wouldn't want to use somebody else's grid name. I do remember, and this was done. You'll laugh at this because it's back from the days of Reaction Grid. But with the full permission of everybody involved, I made an alt avatar in Second Life called Malburn's Reactor.
Oh, there you
go. There were a few of us. A few of us played this little trick, because we decided we wanted to use the avatar to make a Reaction Grid presence. I'm not sure whether you were with Reaction Grid at the time. I mean,
I don't remember. Yeah,
I know. I think it was just Chris and the other two guys,
Robin and Kyle.
Yeah. But it was just being cheeky. Yeah, so we'll do this.
Yeah. But so I've logged in, and first of all, it's visually it's beautiful.
Yeah. No doubt.
And and then again, that's also because again, it's a compiled world, right? You're building offline, and then you're uploading the world, and it's getting compiled, so all the lighting and everything is calculated and done all that. And they've also gone the route of creating a totally unique rendering engine, so they're not licensing anything like Unreal or Unity's rendering at all. They're doing their own totally their own rendering engine, which is a double-edged sword.
Well, exactly, yeah.
It's good because it is their own ship. They don't have to worry about other people updating stuff, but at the same time, they have to keep updating it. There's a reason why all these different AAA game companies license other rendering engines. It's because there are companies like Unreal out there and Unity who are just have tons of resources to throw at keeping.
Yeah, and they are specializing in one thing, and also, of course, you and I both know that although it may not pan out that way, when you've got two separate platforms built on Unity, the back end, so to speak, will ultimately allow, if required, probably for interoperability, because they've got that common base. And Lindas are really going to have to flesh out and maintain this engine all of their own. And if the whole world starts connecting virtual worlds together like a metaverse, and that metaverse is largely driven by spaces running Unity, it's going to leave them a bit out on a limb.
Well, the other thing is the scripting language. That's the other big question that I have too. Is how is the scripting going to work? I mean, the nice thing with building stuff, the nice thing with like doing things in Unity is that you have also a scripting environment. The way you breathe life into everything, and that's common. So I just got to learn how to script things in Unity, and then I can script things in like space, in Sign Space, right?
Yeah.
Or how to script things in VR Chat, which also uses Unity as a development environment. So I mean, it's a double-edged sword. Time will tell if it's the right decision that they made, and you can kind of argue back and forth, which is whether it's a good decision or bad. But the big thing for me though is I'm all about the people, the social side of things, and Sandstor's being billed as social VR. That's right. That's how it's being pitched. And the big thing is like there are no social tools at all. You can't even see like where people are. You can't look at the atlas and see, for example, how many people are in different worlds to know whether or not there's like something going on.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, there's people there, or like in Second Life or OpenSim, go where the green dots are. And
even in Sine you can look at the the explore the places and immediately see how many users are in a particular region, and the top used region will be at the top of the list, so it's very easy.
And, and it's I brought this up. I posted some stuff on Facebook, and actually Abby Linden chimed in, and then I heard Bjorn Linden talking. He's the VP of product for both Second Life and Sansar at Linden Lab, and he was in an event in Second Life the other day at the nonprofit commons, and I brought similar things up. and I got the same response, which is like, this is a creator release. All those things are coming. Social stuff is coming, but first they're focusing on the ability to create content. And to be honest, I really disagree with that strategy because I've seen it in the past. It's, basically saying we're going to hold off on adding all these social things until we get this content creation stuff done. In terms of the tools. And my argument is, if you're trying to facilitate user-generated content, you need to facilitate the ability to collaborate and communicate among the community so people can work together to build stuff, not just build on their own and maybe exchange, coordinate things in Facebook groups, which is ridiculous to me, in my mind. And, you really need to have, and Ebby said something like, well, we'd have to delay things. And my response was like, well, yeah, that's what you do. You release the content creation tools simultaneously with the social tools so that the social tools can help your content creators collaborate and build better content by working together. And this is a content creator release, but I guarantee you that 90% of the people checking out Sansar aren't content creators. They're just going in there to see like what's going on. And with no social tools in this release, and it is a release, they're calling it a creator release, but they're not restricting it to creators. Anyone can log in. They're causing people to have a bad experience from the beginning.
I think they're calling it creators beta or something, but
they're calling it a creator beta. And
this is building their own engine. It's been going on for so long. And now the general public can get in, including a good many second half people, I imagine. They it has to be fit for purpose. I don't think it is. I think you're very right that because the magic of Second Life and OpenSim and other things that have come on since then is that these are user-created spaces. And, there are creators and there are users and there are people who are both. But, the sharing, the social side of it is primary. Unless you've got some friends you can meet and socialize with, you don't form a group to do building. It's the way the path goes, And if you go into somewhere and see lots of glorious sights and you're itching to do one for yourself or meet somebody in there, but there's nobody to meet and you don't know how to do it yourself, you're just going to give up and thinking, well, nice to look at, but that's it. And one thing I noticed, which I think is possibly the biggest disaster of all, and certainly it's something, and it's really going to be a bug in their system. Even if they don't do something about it, even if they after bringing creator tools in, is the sharing experience. Now, Sinewave, for example, if you want to have thousands of avatars in, what they can do is they can duplicate the stage and shard the audience area. So you've got masses of sharded, like duplicate audience areas, sharing one big stage as part of their experience. Now, I found out that Linden Labs are also using sharding for Sansar. And what happened is many of these people were pouring in, to the Dratster events and stuff at the beginning to, not only was the experience taking half an hour to load on, in my case, on a super spec machine, I mean, space takes 30 seconds. Sansar was taking half an hour to get me into an experience. But after so many avatars, I don't know how many it was, they were sharding the region. And so if people crashed, they came back in, but the friends they'd finally met and were talking to were no longer there because they'd been sent to their relog had sent them to a sharded experience. And since they didn't have an easy friends list or way of making friends and stuff like that, most people were lost. They were
there's no chat channels, there's no global groups, there's none of those. See, and this is. I respect what they're doing. I think they're doing technically some really fascinating stuff, but it's a common mistake. It's this over-focusing on the visual and the technical stuff and pushing the social tools to the side and saying, we'll get to those. We'll get to those. And it's, and I think when I was hearing Bjorn talk, the VP of product for both Second Life and Sansar. He sounded like a smart guy, but at the same time, he was talking very much like an engineer. Right? And especially if you're focused on product management, which is which is I've done that a lot too as well. Product management is this intersection between working with engineers, but working with customers also, and working with business development and working with marketing. And so you need to really be thinking about the social stuff, especially if you're building this as social VR from the very beginning. You can't say we're going to add the social stuff later, but we're going to focus on the graphical uploading stuff, the ability to walk, and all these other technical things in terms of uploading materials and so forth, and maybe physical based rendering. I don't know, all that stuff they may be doing down the line, but the social stuff for me, I was just kind of like, gosh darn it, they
yeah.
Well, put it to the back burner, and it's really, if you look in the news too, there's an opportunity, but it's also challenging right now to do this social stuff in VR. I mean, one of the big things in the news was AltSpace VR shut down. They ran out of money. They burned through, what was it, 10, 15 million investment?
A lot of money
in 4 years.
Yeah.
And they burned through all their investment, and they couldn't get any additional funding, and they just they turned out the lights, and they were doing a lot of really smart social VR stuff, and they just ran out of money. So anyway, that's so I think Sansar's, it's interesting, but it's very much now like walking through a museum alone kind of experience. And if you happen to run across someone else, then it's kind of, ooh, hi, can I meet you later? Well, not really. I won't be able to find you, and I won't be able to invite you. And as a content creator too, like I built my environment, and I'm like, oh great, now how do I know if somebody's there when I'm not there? Or can I track traffic? Is anyone visiting my experience? I have no idea.
You describe yourself these days as a level designer, as in the terminology. But how did you feel about even creating your own environment in there? Because I opted for a lounge, and I got a room with some strange-looking walls, very narrow, hardly movable space, and all the sort of template furniture was stacked in the corner, waiting for me to position it. And
I started with, if you go to my environment. And I can't remember the URL of it. I should have bookmarked it. I'll pull it up on the Atlas later, and I'll paste it in the chat when I'm not talking. But I took like the Highlands environment, which is basically a bunch of rocks and hills.
Oh, yeah.
And I just kind of cleared some areas, and I started uploading models and playing around with them. So I have like some statues and some castles and houses and things like that, and playing around with it's very straightforward, uploading FBX models, applying the materials, the texture mapping, and it was pretty straightforward, in terms of just making the models and making them, adding mesh colliders to the models. That's a big deal too, making sure that you can like walk through your house and walk up the steps and things like that. And it all worked. It was pretty basic, but at the same time, like I'm looking around and I'm like, gosh, I wish there were a way for me to add wind and have trees that respond to wind and all these things that I'm used to doing in Unity.
Did you? Well,
life.
We're going to talk about mesh a bit later because it's on everybody's lips actually, but regarding OpenSim. But when you when you import the FBX files, which I intuitively assume to be fairly easy, did you have to import the mesh collider with that, or did they provide the tools for making the mesh collision in World?
Well, the thing is, okay, so the rule of thumb is the model that you have, your mesh collider can be simpler than that. Yeah. Ideally, for me, I really don't care because it's kind of you take a performance hit, but it's like I uploaded a house, and then it's like, what's the collider mesh? And I'm like, well, the same mesh.
Exactly.
and it worked fine.
That's exactly what I do, but I was told, no, you're using up too much of the server.
It is. It's horribly inefficient, but then I'm thinking, we're at the state where software should be smart enough to interpolate a little bit, whatever, and I'm like, well, let's see if it lets me do that. And anyway, it's a pre-rendered environment. They're doing optimization when you're building the environment, but yeah, it's taking a performance hit in terms of the physics calculations you have to deal with. But that's how I'm doing. I'm just using the same the same model for both the visual mesh and the collider.
And the collider mesh. Yeah, that tends to be my approach
it's dirty. It's quick and dirty.
It's quick and dirty, but it works. So that's the way you like to do it, The other thing that was very peculiar is when I got this lounge, I'll probably delete it and I might even go for Highlands like you, so that it's a bigger space. But there was a sort of staircase hidden behind one of the walls. It was almost as though I was meant to rearrange the walls to expose the staircase. It's like, all the kebab bars were just dumped there. It didn't look like a lounge at all. But the first thing I noticed when I moved over, right, I knocked against a little table and it had a vase of flowers on it. The vase of flowers fell off the table with a clomp when I touched it, and I thought, "Whoops!" But there was no way of picking up the flowers and putting them back on the table. I looked and I could not figure out, I thought, oh, this is great. You can knock things off tables and pick them up. No, you can't pick them up. It was just disorientating. The fact that I could be having virtual accidents like this and not being able to kind of repair the result. So
yeah, I mean again, I would call it an alpha. I would not call it a beta.
Yeah,
a beta is when you are like, beta means mostly feature complete and a minimally viable product. An MVP is beta. It's in beta. Let's iron out the bugs. Yeah. Alpha is we don't have wheels on the car yet and there's no doors. And the steering and the shifter only goes into reverse, but it's coming. Alpha is still not minimally viable product and adding new features. That's what this is.
Yeah,
classic software development terms. It's an alpha release, and again, for me, it's fine if it is what it is. But
I kind of wonder. We can't be privy to this, of course, whether its development is really going ahead as well as they have planned. I mean, it seems to me there have been endless delays on the public so-called beta, although we'll now refer to it as a public alpha. But there have been delays, and it's almost as though they couldn't delay it anymore, and they had to bring it out, even though it's not fit for purpose yet.
It might be very well. Yeah, it might be very well. And again, I think I congratulate them for all the work they did. It is beautiful. What they've done is fantastic so far. But again, for me, the big thing is, man, guys, you should have released some real powerful social tools at the very beginning like this. As soon as you open the doors to the public in any way, shape, or form, have the social tools there so you can start right away helping to bootstrap the creator community as well as the non-creator community. Because again, I guarantee you 90% of the people who are going in exploring Sansar aren't uploading worlds. They're just kind of walking around checking it out. And you only get one chance. You never get a second chance for a first impression, right? And if you go in there and it's like, I can't friend anybody, I can't find anybody, I don't know where people are, and then it's like, oh, there's a new version in 6 months. It's like, well, I remember it as kind of so why should I go?
We've got a viewer comment that's reflecting that too, from Open Sim Life. The things that actually got and kept people in SL have been ignored in Sansart to this point. So.
Well, from the initial days, yeah. I mean, I remember the first time logging into Second Life, and I didn't know what the hell was going on. I attached a motorcycle to my head. I was walking around with no pants on, and I was wandering around. This is a true story. And I was wandering around in some swamp, and I came across this little house, and there were two people in the house talking. And I was like, hey, you guys, I'm new. And I can't remember who they were, but they had been around for a while. And I friended them, and they were like, next time you log on, just look for us and you can talk to us. And I'm like, okay, thanks. And then I logged out, and then I remember going back in, and I was like, oh, I'm going to be confused going in. Then I remember thinking, but I've got two friends, and if I see them online, I'm just going to start talking to them, and they can walk me through stuff. And that's what you need from the very beginning, because I guarantee you, if I had logged on for the first time in Second Life and had an experience like with Sansar had now, with no social connections made, no community engagement, no establishing social ties that I can go back to later to help me learn more, and I probably never would have gone back, or have gone back a lot.
Well, I mean, Second Life has also had a default landing spot, which is the new user experience.
That's true.
So, and you have to go through a few elementary things, don't you, before you can even get into mainland SL. I was fortunate back in the when 10, 12 years ago, I met somebody who was in a similar position to me, and we sort of became buddies and explored together, although I didn't have any kind of mentor show me stuff. But I actually think in retrospect, it's actually important that if you'd had an established resident, who showed you about. I was a great believer in Second Life. In, some of my real world friends, I want to show them what was what. So I'd get them to log in, get a name, and I'd say, just log in, give me your name, and I'll teleport you to me and show you stuff.
Yeah. And I guarantee you, like, if there were anyone from Learning Lab here, they would be saying, all that stuff is coming. It's coming. This is just an initial beta release. Sure. And my argument back would be, you should have some of these basic tools at the very beginning, as soon as you open your doors to the public in any way, shape, or form, like has happened now.
I've noticed that in the last week or so it's been open. People, as you said, you were able to get your Highland thing. I was able to get this lounge, it was called. It's still there, but I didn't really do anything with it. I'm now find places on the map, not the map, sorry, the atlas, which is always one in mind. I wonder about the wisdom of that naming. And I go to look at them, and they're clearly people who have probably only been in a day themselves, and they've managed to get themselves a place that's showing on the atlas, but they haven't done anything with it. Like my first Prim region, And I remember them making a bit of a fuss about that. They were determined to get it all right and let the professionals who use Maya and stuff like that in to get content for when it opens. I always assume that the delays were in the mechanics and that there'll be something social at the start. But actually all that's happened here is we're getting all the amateur graders. So, if you tell people it's as easy as uploading an FBX, and somebody goes to Google Warehouse and finds a whole lot of FBX.
Or Turbo Squid and finds a free FBX and just uploads it. There you go. And they walk away.
Then the only user experience I'm seeing at the moment is people trying out building skills by importing FBXs and seeing what happens,
Yeah.
And that can't be a very good way to go. And, there's no clear... I've watched a lot of the tutorials and things, and that funny little beam for teleporting with, and it's got different keys from Second Life for doing the same things. And if it was me, I would have at least have mapped the interface to keys that people knew, instead of creating completely new key combinations. Software manufacturers have done that for ages. I remember there was a furore at one point where an Adobe, who had, they bought Macromedia, so they had Director and Flash and all that, and they did an overhaul of all their software to make sure all the quick keys in each piece of software were the same. Because their studio users will want to remember keys, and I know that I hop between, say, Space, High Fidelity and OpenSim, and if I'm in there from I have to be in there for a few, maybe an hour or so before I finally get used to my interface, and then I log out back and I'm in OpenSim and I think, oh God, I'm back here now. I've got to go back to there's no obvious, who would dream of changing the keys for cut, copy, paste after 30 years? It would be stupid.
True.
So I don't really understand why a lot of these roles, I suppose the WASD keys are a kind of ubiquitous one, but I mean, apart from that, there's just no, any new piece of software, whether it's a world viewer or a spreadsheet, requires getting to know the interface, and you don't want, how many learning curves can you go through to learn a different self-management style through each
Mel, there's another comment in the YouTube chat, just following up on the social aspect, and that's saying that some of the best builds in Second Life were team builds, were cooperative constructions.
Absolutely.
Again, it reinforces that concept.
Yeah, and the thing is, the other big thing is now there's no in-world real-time content creation, which supposedly is coming. Right, all it is now is uploading models from your hard drive alone and then reloading the world, right? And so they're saying that kind of stuff is coming. I hope it comes soon, because that would be a key differentiator. If they can nail that and have real-time in-world content creation using something like, maybe not the full-blown Prim-based, atomistic building tools, but have some in situ content creation that you can do in real time with other people and collaboratively build, meaning that, hey, okay, I'll work on this wall of this house here, you build the roof and stick it on the top when I'm done with the walls, kind of thing. In real time. Then that'd be something amazing, and but
converse about how it's built.
Yeah.
Something else there that was really buggy, and I've got to. I've sort of got used to this in space because once you got used to it happening in Unity, you can make sure things are leveled out to your terrain and stuff like that. But in my lounge there, they gave me a settee, and I did find I was able to move that, and I think I was able to scale it and stuff like that. But it had a very Unity-like feature, which is very confusing. And that was, I would select, I get all the arrow keys for up, down, everything else in one frame. In other words, I didn't select scale or move or anything. I get, you just selected it and you got every combination in one kind of big mess. And more importantly, you can actually drag you can actually, in Second Life or OpenSim, you can drag something deliberately under the terrain. But because everything in Sansar is like mesh, it is actually very easy. There's no prompt to stop you positioning, say, a settee halfway into the floor. And it's not until you come out of edit that you suddenly realize what you've done. And I visited one region in Sansar where clearly somebody had worked on a template and moved all their stuff about. And the landing position was actually a good few meters underneath their ground level.
Oof.
And now from working, say, Unity, working on a pre-compiled world, you don't put stuff under the land level, which will have a collision mesh stopping people falling through it. The stuff you put underneath might as well not be there unless you're making a really deliberate thing with a tunnel area under the plane. And it's something I've got used to in Unity, even though I can't use Unity yet, is the realization that when I go to space, and arguably go to Sansar 2, and High Fidelity for that matter, I'm in a void, right? There is no OpenSim or Second Life type terrain. Terrain is not there in the way we think of it, like one gigantic mesh that's underneath us. We are basically in limbo, and the first thing you do when you create a world is create the ground level. So you have a reference for everything else you're going to build. And whereas when you go into Second Life or OpenSim, the first thing you see is a flat terrain, which has the reference already there, so to speak. And I think it's clear that some people have been uploading meshes and things and not quite understanding, and that's not surprisingly, actually, for somebody who doesn't know exactly how they're meant to treat them and place them, so that they're ending up with these straight spaces that actually don't work. I mean, how can I walk along a ground level into somebody's room when the room is 3 meters above me and I have no way of jumping up to the base of that mesh? It's very, so I think they're tempting fate, allowing people to upload their own FBXs even without, giving them very clear guidelines as to, just something that prevents them from accidentally putting them in the wrong places and stuff, like under the floor.
Training.
Can I ask a quick question?
Mm-hmm.
Pathfinder, did you go into Sansar using a headset or using a 2D desktop?
I went using a 2D desktop.
Oh, okay. I was just thinking back to Mel's flower vase, and I was wondering, with a headset and hand controllers, would that make a difference in picking something up that had fallen to the floor? Yeah.
It might, but given that this is meant to be a platform for all devices, ultimately, it would. This is the problem High Fidelity has. They depend on people wearing all this high-tech gear, which is wonderful if you're into wearing all that, and but it means they've got a slightly dysfunctional 2D client.
Mm-hmm.
If I've got a 2D client, the way of making friends in High Fidelity is to go up and shake somebody's hand. But if now there is a hidden keystroke that somebody told me about, which allows me to point point at an avatar and click a keystroke that sends them an add friend thing. But, you know, it took me ages to find that out because I had no tactile controller. There was no way I could shake hands. I tried it with a Leap Motion, but because High Fidelity is built with to use Leap Motion when it's facing outwards from a headset. Mm-hmm. But my Leap Motion is like a USB stick on my desk, so it responds to hands in front of the screen, not hands as would be seen from a headset. A different perspective. So when I went to shake somebody's hands with Leap Motion, my arm ended up facing backwards over my shoulder. You know, so I couldn't shake their hand.
Oh, right.
And, you know, but if, you know, anybody in a headset just walks up to somebody and shakes their hand and there's an automatic backhand shake and they make friends. But if you're not in a headset, you can't do it. And I think they have the problem of being a bit too geeky. And, you know, even they're doing some wonderful TV broadcasts, High Fidelity, for example. But it's not television as I would know it, and you know the fun and game show sort of thing is just like a load of geeks playing, and they got decent enough voices and stuff like that. But it's all like we're cool guys and techie, and it's almost as if they only expect somebody with a bit of techie syndrome to be watching. Yep. That's a mistake, you know. That is, you know, that was the difference between the early days of Second Life and when Second Life opened up. It got users, it got the general public, a microcosm of real life. You know, it wasn't the World. I don't know how early you were involved, Pathfinder, but World and all that stuff, which I wasn't around for, but I've seen clips of. You know, that was all Linden staffers throwing prims at each other, and you know, and doing all sorts of crazy, sort of stupid stuff. Really, just game playing. You know, it wasn't until it became public and got the user traction that it actually became what it was. And, you know, Linden Labs famously had no idea what they were creating. Philip had no idea what he was creating. You know, he didn't know he knew what it was going to be, but he didn't know how it was going to be used.
They totally didn't see the social collaborative side of things. They were thinking about an environment where we can just make stuff.
Yeah.
and then they realized it's more, you know, and then it's like, oh, they realized it's a world, but then the thing is, a world is stuff and people, and the people side of things was never fully seen in the original vision in terms of the collaborative social nature of everything, in my opinion. And that's why a lot of the social tools in Second Life are still clunky as hell. You know, it's like, you know, and because they got just enough so that the community could bootstrap itself. But to be honest, it was a
afterthought.
It was a lucky convergence of features. That's what it was. From a product design perspective, it was a lucky lightning in a bottle, right? I think. Yeah. In my opinion.
And do we say anything about Sansar that could be that lucky lightning? You have been in Space Pathfinder too, of course, haven't you? Probably not so much as me, oddly enough. Now I go weekly to Adam's Q&A office hours.
Oh, nice.
And sometimes pop in for dance events. I must say, you know, if I'm not really I tend to go if I'm log into a music event in OpenSim, I normally strap on the dance avatar and go multitask somewhere for an hour with the music playing in the background if I like it, you know. But so I'm not one for sitting there watching myself dance and chatting away about nothing. But some people are, some people aren't. Fair enough. But I kind of like, because it's all, you know, this sublime motion capture animation in space, you know, I am quite prone to strapping on an animation there because I just can't believe the smooth motions that my avatar is doing, you know, until the novel goes off at least. You know, so I find it interesting, but it's all, you know, people like Thursday Ember and all, you know, the hardcore OpenSim people that, you know, my friends here, really don't see much point in High Fidelity or Space or Sensor or for Second Life half the time, because, you know, there's like an anarchy of sort of freedom and stuff in OpenSim, and the fact everything's based on open source that, You know, we don't think we're in a walled garden, and all these other things that are coming along are to a certain extent walled gardens. Now, you know, Philip Rosedale, I interviewed him a couple of times and asked him about what he thought of OpenSim and the hybrid grid and whether Second Life could connect to it. This is really before he moved on. And, you know, oh, there aren't enough people there yet. And I won't say it's impossible down the line, but blah, blah, blah. And yet the moment he starts High Fidelity, it's clear he's been looking at OpenSim. And, you know, looking at the idea of building components that are open source mixed in with proprietary ones so that they get a return on investment, but they're actually putting in place the tools that might enable them to be a focal point in an expansion of the metaverse, which is interesting, although I think maybe they have got too much venture capital for their own good, because it seems like it feels like they're just slowly building and will be doing so forever sometimes. You know, having got latency and a few of the other initial tasks out the way. But so certainly part of that is going to be a walled garden, you know, because they've got to grab something back for their investors. Sine Space, you know, they've been working on that alongside with other things for about 7 years. So they've got a head start on Sansar, and in my opinion, Sansar just is nothing compared to what Space is already. You know, Space, I feel it's been Sansar to its own pitch, you know. But again, it's kind of that walled garden in many senses. And Sansar, like Second Life, is very much a walled garden. And you know, I think you agree with me, Pathfinder, that the ideal metaverse will not be, you know, if there are walled gardens, at least they'll have gates into them, you know, like hypergates. You know, ultimately, you don't want, you know, I like describing ourselves as moving from conceptually pages to spaces. You know, when we go online, we shouldn't be just going to a page, we should be going to a space. Some people will say something like Facebook, it already is a space, but on screen it's pages, let's face it. You know, somewhere where we can move, navigate, do things other than just speak and whatever to, you know, friends like you can do on Skype. And, you know, I'm very, you know, we don't know how it's going to pan out long term, but I don't see the, you know, advanced communication tools that these are, I don't see them really panning out, frankly, in the future, unless you can intercommunicate, interoperate. Now, I'm not saying that, you know, you should be able to res a prim using your OpenSim High Fidelity in High Fidelity. In OpenSim, sorry, in High Fidelity. You know, things like inventory will relate to the platform when you're on at a given time. But I still think that my avatars as a presence, an instance, an identity should be able to move between these platforms, and that, you know, inventory items, virtual goods that you accumulate should be usable if in multiple platforms, if the platform supports it. So if I buy an MP3, for example, I should be able to play it in any platform that will play an MP3 for me, just like I can play it in any media player that will play an MP3 for me. And I see this walled garden approach as really, you know, how many separate ecosystems can there be? Just in terms of current technology, you've got Microsoft's attempts to catch up, and you've got Google's ecosystem and Android, and you've got Apple's, you know, but they're all intensely copying each other and trying to enclose their audience in their own ecosystem, rather than just providing services to an ever-growing ecosystem. And I don't know how you feel, Pathfinder, but I feel, you know, I keep wondering, apart from OpenSim's expansion and the hypergrid's expansion, what really is happening with all this new stuff, as you say, that may look great and everything, that is actually moving us further towards the real development of connected spaces online, just the way pages are connected. You can jump from one to another at the moment. Why can't we jump from space to space? You know.
Well, it's because everyone wants to be the next Facebook.
Yeah.
In Silicon Valley. And everyone wants to, and Facebook is the biggest walled garden, and so people are still thinking that way. I mean, and people are thinking less about the interconnected way that the web works, and the internet for a lot of people is becoming more and more a bunch of walled gardens. You've got your walled garden of Facebook, your walled garden of Instagram, your walled garden of, you know, of different experiences that are basically little gilded cages, you know, where you are the product. In most cases, like with Facebook, you are the product in Facebook. That's why it's free for you. Because if something's free, then you are the product. And it's, you know, it's this. I just think it's unfortunate, because I do think that the huge strength of a platform like OpenSim, again, is number of things. Number one, it's open source. Everything is open source. Number two, it's this ability to host your own environments. You have these interconnected worlds where your identity is the same across them, and your inventory is the same across them all. And you have this ability to also have all of these different environments hosted, maybe by a company, but you could just set up your own computer or even run it on a thumb drive, your own virtual world. Everything. You own everything. You truly own it. You know, and there's a lot of confusion these days, especially with services like Spotify, between ownership and access.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the Second Life. You don't own things in Second Life. You pay for accessing them. You don't own your inventory in Second Life, in that you can't take it with you in your pocket somewhere else unless you've created it yourself and you export it as a
and for that matter, nobody owns their iTunes library.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, yeah. Well, there's a difference between access and ownership, and so, you know, so if you use a service, for example, like Bandcamp, which is a huge service for music, where you actually can own the music. You download the MP3 that has no digital rights management attached to it. You can do whatever you want with that MP3. You can copy it. You can put it on a thumb drive. You can delete it. Whatever. Yeah. And I think the problem is a lot of these virtual worlds, you know, like if you create an experience in some of these other platforms that are hosted by other places that are only able to exist by being hosted, then do you really own that, or do you just have access to it? And, you know, unless you can export it, unless you could do a full, like hosting companies in OpenSim, where they say, like, you know, you've got your world in OpenSim, but you can get an OR file of your world whenever you want, and then that's ownership. Yeah. That's access and ownership. You know, you're able to access it on a company's servers. Plus, you have true ownership over it, meaning that I can take all that content somewhere else and use it for something else. And the problem is, if you have proprietary formats that are closed, that are bound to the fortunes of specific companies and not open source, then if that company goes out of business or changes their business plan, who knows what will happen to the format of that content. You know, maybe it'll no longer be supported and it'll be useless. You know, the same way, like, you have a zip disk at home and there's nobody making zip drives anymore to read it. You know?
Yeah. I mean, it's a separate point, actually, but you know, I think this is happening more and more, and I wonder how long it's going to be before people sus. Last night I was actually talking with Leah Lobo, you probably know. Oh, yeah. And you know, we were planning to reboot the OSCC organizers group in Skype, and none of us could find it, because Skype in its various updates no longer it keeps your contacts list, and it keeps your lists, but it doesn't keep a record of let's see, the last time I used this group was about 9 months ago. We all let it go silent based on the fact we'll keep it there so that we can, you know, reboot it now. So we're going to have to make a completely new one. Behind the scenes, Skype is playing all sorts of silly buggers with, you know, what's there, you know, because it's not something you use regularly. You've either got a regular group open or, you know, but we've all got used to digging up an old group to reboot it when we need it. And it's just not there anymore. And Microsoft are extremely good at this. They'll send, you know, things people have used for ages. They might not be used by the majority of people, but they're used by a lot of their users as part of their operating system, suddenly start disappearing. And in their arrogance, they think, you know, well, we'll decide what people can use. We don't want, you know, it's not up to them to decide, it's us, you know. And I keep saying, well, you're making an operating system, not a specialist piece of software. And if it was a specialist piece of software, the upgrade would be voluntary, because you're probably going to want to charge each time, and I think eventually people are going to suss that they're being messed around. It's just that it's done so cleverly these days and almost ubiquitous. And I wonder how, people are, falling into it. I mean, I know people on Facebook who I'm really surprised are on Facebook, because I figure, well, if they actually knew what they're on, they wouldn't. They'd be protesting against it.
Well, I mean, the problem here too is it's boiling the frog here. Like, there are just so many changes slowly and gradually that people will eventually see access as ownership. They won't remember what real ownership is. They won't remember what it was like to be able to actually download your music whenever you want or have actual copies of MP3 files. They'll just think, well, I pay Spotify to be able to access all the music ever written by so and so or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's my music, they'll say. But then they don't realize, well, guess what? Spotify goes out of business. Guess what? You don't have access to that music anymore. Or they decide to not support a certain platform and you can't play it on that device anymore. And it's just a boiling the frog scenario. I think the danger is, in 10 years there won't be people who really remember what it's like to truly own stuff, or to truly the value of real of being able to have this is my ship and I can sail it however I like. The ability to host environments on machines. They'll think everything's in the cloud, everything's fine, and as long and they'll get used. It's kind of like product design. It's kind of like user experience design. Like, you forget often. You forget how much we all adapt to terrible user interfaces, and you can remember very easily if you try to teach someone like an older person, like teach a parent or something, how to do something on a computer, and you suddenly realize, well, they should know how to do this. It's easy, and then you realize, well, wait a minute, no, it's not easy. I've just learned how to do this thing using a very kind of unintuitive UI.
It's over time, isn't it? Too, you're forced to use this, and suddenly you do know it. But
so I think the danger is we'll just kind of get used to the adaptations that we've made. We will have made changes in our behavior and our expectations because the world is the way it is, with everything done by Facebook.
Excuse me, we've got a relevant comment in the YouTube chat about considering, do we really own things in real life? I mean, do we really own the house that we have? Do we really own, in terms of the legal system, but you can get philosophical. What is ownership, right?
Well, ownership is I can burn it to the ground and no one will get me in trouble, or rip it apart, right? So most people don't own houses. Most people, banks own houses.
Right.
Banks. I was just going to say.
Banks own houses until you've paid your mortgage off. Banks own houses, and governments, require taxes on your house even if you've paid it off. And so that's one thing. But I mean, at the end of the day, if I can take it and destroy it or rip it apart and repurpose it and give it to someone else, then I own it. I may not be able to resell it complete. That's there may be some license. Like, I can't download a song and then sell it to somebody.
No, think of it. I think of it this way, right? Because I love the media, DVDs, CDs, stuff like that. If I can pick it up and take it to a second-hand shop to be resold in the physical world, then I must own it. But, the test as to whether I own something is, can I pick it up, take it somewhere, and resell it at the second-hand shop? If I can't.
Well, the other thing, too, is, being able to modify it, right? I mean, that's the whole, and that's the whole, there's a whole conference we can have just talking about these kinds of things, like people being able to modify, like, buying things that you're not allowed to modify. Those kinds of little tricky things that you sometimes see built into licensing agreements and stuff like that.
Yeah, well, DVD player says, if you undo this screw, your warranty is void. It's the same idea. You don't modify this thing, please. You'll blow yourself up, But but I think it is tangible, like the, I've got movies I can stream, but usually I get them on Ultraviolet, which is like a ticket number that's in the Blu-ray or the DVD, because I like having the physical product there. What if the internet goes down with a thermonuclear strike or something, and we lose a thermomagnetic strike, and we lose electronic communications? The TV signals wouldn't be there and everything, but we might just be able to play a DVD or Blu-ray. I don't know, but there is something where to depend on everything being virtual. Virtual is an enhancement. to our lives. It is not an alternative to our lives. And the same, I think, with, products. I mean, I don't want to, sorry, my avatar's got to take on, you've got to take up that leather jacket because you bought it in New York and you're now leaving American airspace. Please. I don't, I want to go back to Britain wearing this flashy American leather jacket, please. Right, I'm not going to take it off mid-flight and hand it back. There are certain, I apply real world logic to this. I'm quite happy that I buy a house and it's stuck where I buy it because you build houses places. But I don't expect a leather jacket that I wear to be stuck in a particular place or have restrictions on it. And, I think content creators and things in virtual worlds and things are really taking the piss a little bit sometimes when they, they treat everything as product and item, whereas they should still think of its function and utility to the person buying it. To a certain extent. But actually, I'm sort of digressing here. There's been a lot of talk in OpenSim recently, with the, I suppose, partly the pending merge, the new series of OpenSim, the 09 series that will be have its first proper release before too long, and feature all the Melanie's Avination grid code merge. And a lot of people, I know a lot of people who've listened to this show, I've heard people like Melanie on here as guests, and there's very mixed feelings because they're suddenly being told the no new OpenSim will break their meshes, and Melanie will say, well, that's simply because you've been uploading them wrong in the first place. And but of course, people's reaction to that is, well, I've done it and it works, so why can't it stay the same? And of course, if they don't upgrade their OpenSim, of course, it will stay the same. But if they want the new version, they'll probably find they break a lot of stuff and they have to redo it. And of course, they don't want to. Fair enough. But they have the choice not to upgrade. One thing that, I suppose, having had to look at Unity because of space, that I've got to grips with is this thing of the meshes, and particularly collision meshes, where people prefer, because of the weight on the processor, that you import a mesh. Often it's just one prim, and it's a visual entity. It's a shape of visual entity that renders graphics, but you walk right through it. If it's a piece of terrain, you'll sink into it instead of walking over it. So you have to import something that's a collision mesh. Now, cheap and dirty, like we said, Pathfinder, in the case of my terrain files, I use the terrain file as the collision mesh too, because I actually want people walking on the terrain to follow the exact contours of the visual mesh. But if I have, say, a settee like this seat in the studio, and let's say this chair was a mesh, it isn't actually, but it will be a one prim object. All I actually need to do is create an invisible prim with a height of where I'm sitting under the chair, encompassing its width and depth. And that acts as a collision mesh because it will stop people walking through the chair, and it will also provide the collision surface for my avatar to sit on. So I'll be told not to import a mesh of the chair to act as a collision mesh because the complexity of that mesh is going to stress the server and isn't needed. But of course, I think what you'll find in OpenSim here, certainly in my case, so I'm as guilty as anybody, is that I tend to bring a mesh in, or a sculpties I work with quite a lot, though they're a bit of a different cup of tea. And if it works, it works. And I don't really think about needing to build a network of imprisipims to roughly define a collision surface underneath the mesh. Whereas I'm told more or less that in future, and that's probably what I should have to do, because the 08 series of OpenSim actually artificially creates a collision mesh based on the visual mesh. And because that's not the proper way of doing things, it's been taken out. And I hope I haven't got this wrong. There's probably going to be somebody IMing me in a minute, Sammy, but I've got it all wrong. But it seems to me that when the new series of OpenSim comes along, then a visual mesh will no longer be read as an automated collision mesh. Are you with me? So I'm now, like you have Pathfinder Path, I've got Metaworld running on my own machine. It's my own grid, private grid. It's on the hypergrid for friends and stuff, but I don't advertise it for public visitors. It's my workstation, so I've got other stuff to do on it as well. It runs. I barely notice it running, even when I'm logged in. But a few people coming in would change that. But I've really moved. It's something I understood before, and you probably know Pathfinder, but I never really clicked before just how psychologically it changes you to be running your own grid on your own machine and using it as a base for hypergridding. I still could use this avatar to come in and do stuff in Canada, which is best to use this avatar. But my suitcase is now principally belongs to my avatar on my own private grid, and I'm free to hypergrid in and out and stuff like that. And until you're actually doing it, I don't think you realize how empowered you feel because you know that your suitcase and your assets are all safe on your own hard disk, not on somebody's cloud. And it also tends to be quicker, which is a kind of bonus point. So but I have still been working with all my old assets and all my old meshes and things, and I'll have the opportunity to upgrade OpenSim, but I'm probably going to be very nervous about doing so. It might be better to just keep running the one I've got so nothing I've already done breaks. But I was talking to somebody else, and we mentioned this on a couple of recent shows, but you might be interested in Pathfinder because I've seen Unity, even though I'm not really good at using it. And I've seen the bare space worlds we get in somewhere like space, and indeed Sansar now, and even Hyperdeity, where you're in a kind of void, and part of the creative process starts with creating a plane that will be your terrain level, as it were. When you're running your own region, your own grid, it's technically possible to actually switch off terrain. I don't just mean visually hide it, but apparently regions can have a line of code in the ini file that hasn't been fully tested with the new version of OpenSim yet, but can effectively render the terrain gone. It still reads where the terrain is, the height map, but it no longer takes time. When you've got a VAR file, it no longer takes time to draw 3x3 tiles of all 16 regions or something, because there's no texture to draw. So it immensely speeds up loading a VAR file stuff. Obviously, the stuff that, the prims and the meshes still have to load. And I was quite curious to find, although in an AOR file you have the terrain, in your viewer, the terrain never goes into your cache. Only objects on the terrain get cached. So the need for your viewer to cache the terrain, it's constantly drawing the terrain. And if the terrain is basically transparent, non-existent, then it speeds everything up. Now, of course, this relies totally on putting your mind space in creating, as it were, into something like Unity, or hi-fi, sine wave, Sansor, whatever, where you deliberately cover all your ground with artificial mesh terrain before you eliminate the real terrain. After all, you've got to have a base for working on. If you just get rid of your terrain, you're kind of working in limbo somewhere above and below the ocean. You can't quite define where you are. But it appears to actually speed up things, and I'm wondering two things really. Firstly, whether the future would be a system where obviously Third's Outworlds product that I use is my facilitator, but whether we could all be running our own little grids as our homes on our own computers, and that the OpenSim metaverse may increasingly become a simple interconnected network of home instances of simulators connected together. Presumably there'll still be big hubs, you know, commercial grids and hubs that you could teleport into, you know, for meeting lots of people and putting on events that you wouldn't want to put on a home computer. But I'm just wondering whether we would move a bit more towards this idea of your grid is your desktop and your hypergrid out, but also whether we would start approaching economies this way too, as I say, like marking out things like terrain because they're slowing everything down. And I don't know where I'm going with this. I'm just citing it. I'm citing some things that have come up recently. I'm wondering really what your thoughts about this are, especially as you've been running Pathfinder as a self-contained private sim for a long while. And when I say private, I don't mean inaccessible. I mean local.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like I have two perspectives on this. I have my own perspective and like-minded people where it's like, isn't it great to run this on our own desktop and have total control over it? And then I think, well, most people would never conceive of doing something like that. Most people don't even store their music on their computer. They stream everything. Again, it's coming back to access, not ownership, right? Most people are actually happy using something like a Chromebook where they don't even have anything on a hard drive, where everything is in a cloud. And so I you know, it's kind of like putting my product management hat on, where, you know, as a product manager, you realize that your perspective is interesting, but ultimately irrelevant because the reality of the world is not your reality. And in terms of, it may be a reality of like-minded people like you, but the general public, the vast majority of people on the planet, may be completely different. And this is one of those cases where unfortunately, I tend to think, well, I think the vast majority of people on the planet are actually completely different. They don't think about...
You put me in my place there. You've got a very good point. I mean, because I often make it in other instances. But, you know,
it's like the difference between people who are like, oh yeah, I store all of my movies on my home network, and I have a server, and I have, you know, this kind of I have a Linux server serving movies and things. And it's like, you know what? You are 0.001% of the people on the planet. Most people get their movies through Netflix. Again, access, not ownership. They get their music through Spotify. Again, access, not ownership. They think about everything in the cloud where it's somebody else's problem, and they're happy using things like Chromebooks or mobile devices where they don't have any local storage at all.
But actually,
it's funny.
The irony is I'm actually the same, because when I'm not, you know, doing video or working virtual worlds over here on my workstation, I spend all my time on my iPad, and I never download anything. I download apps, that I need to use, but everything is just online. It is actually a totally different world, and if all I had was an iPad, it'd be out of the question to run an open simulator grid.
And I was surprised because I thought, especially in the United States, you know, to me, having all this stuff in a server is a very socialized type of way of storing data and keeping information. And I thought that'll never go in capitalist America. Everyone's going to want to keep their things on their hard drives, but that's not how it worked out.
Well, it's because it comes down to it really comes down to ease
convenience.
Of use.
Yep.
Right, it's convenience. It comes down to convenience, because the first time, I mean, we've all been there. Oh, my server in my house has crashed. I have to reboot it, or I have to do something with the kernel in Linux. You know what I mean? As soon as you start having those things happen to you, you realize, okay, 99.99% of people on the planet, if this happened to them, they would be like, screw it. I'm going to keep it in the cloud. I don't want to worry about it. Yeah. I'll just subscribe to Netflix or Hulu or somebody or Xbox stuff. You can get everything off Xbox in terms of media consumption, and none of it is hosted locally. It's all access, not ownership. So with virtual worlds, I think it's for hard. I mean, again, at the same time though, then the other side of the coin is like, well, okay, you know, there's a difference between pop music and like opera, right? The markets are very different, and one is insanely huge and one is just very tiny. But at the same time, there's nothing wrong with just like being into opera or something very nichey. right? Something that's not going to be millions and millions of people around the world. And so maybe these, as long as if we can band together and have this ability to, create a metaverse where we're sharing environments and we're hosting them on our desktops, maybe that's fine. It's just, but at the same time, I think there's this part of me that's really nagging me, saying, John, this is never going to scale in terms of market, because not every, so few people are even thinking of the concept of hosting something on a server on their desktop, using their desktop as a server.
Yeah, I suppose, and I'm not making excuses here, because you put me in my place there, because actually I'm forever straddling the worlds where I'm lying horizontal with an iPad over there, or I'm sitting on the desk here with the workstations in front of me. They are very different experiences, actually, and the iPad's far more useful for non-specialized things, like other things like this. But I'm now thinking of high fidelity. All right, now. It's public beta. I've got a feeling it's going to be public beta for a very long time. And people are popping in there. That's the other interesting thing. I remember I was going to point this out. When I went to the beta, alpha of Sansar, I didn't see a second. All the places I went, there were other avatars exploring. I didn't see a familiar name anywhere. But in space, which is a totally non-Linden product, I keep meeting Second Life artists, avatars galore. They're the same people, the same avatar name. And they are not tech people who are going to be building regions or working in Unity. They are people moving into space because of the social side of it. And that I found very intriguing. Hey, what are you doing here? I never expected to see you here. And, how long have you been here? And I said, a few months. He said, I just arrived yesterday. In terms of familiar names, at least, it's getting more traction than Sansar is. But that's anecdotal, really, but interesting, I thought. When I installed High Fidelity, which just keep updating about twice a week, it automatically installs the sandbox and the client. So what you're saying about most people on mobile devices aren't going to want to be running servers on their machines, you could probably argue they're not going to be running, they're not desktop users, basically, half of the time, or they're on Chromebooks and things. So they're probably not even going to run OpenSim or Second Life, or maybe not even High Fidelity. But when you do install High Fidelity, because you want it, it installs the home server component as part of the client. They're two separate processes, but basically you log in to wherever you last were. That might be your local sandbox, your local region on your own computer, or it might be on a High Fidelity's network. But the two concepts have actually been integrated. Whereas Space and Sansar, it's very clear you are logging into corporate servers. And in Sansar's case, I don't know what they're running them on, probably all the Second Life reject servers, because they're just so slow, it's unbelievable. But there's no feeling that you have, your own room, let alone land or region or grid or whatever you want to call it. Your own room, there's not that feeling that your own room is on your home system. Now, I'm imagining a halfway point here where my iPad will become as capable as a laptop, and a high-powered iPad will be a high-powered iPad. And I might be able to download an app there that is a virtual environment. And when I open it, the actual immediate environment I'll be in will be actually saved onto my iPad, maybe with or without me knowing it. It doesn't really matter. And from that environment, I will be able to move to other spaces on a network. And I do believe that is quite likely on something like the iPad. It will probably be on an iPhone and an Android phone too, but I have mixed feelings about how workable those screen sizes are if you want to be in a space, even with garbled and stuff, please, you can't be in a space that is going to be a world, when it's a tiny little box in your hand. You're going to have to use some way of magnifying it, to be in it. But I think with some mobile technology, it will come. So when you download the Outworlds install, for example, it sets it all up for you very easily. So you've got your own grid on your desktop, and you're immediately hypergrid enabled and can go and do what you normally do, what you're used to doing. Now, I agree with you, Pathfinder, that that this is not something everybody's going to want to do. But I think that I may be wrong, but I think, and this is in a very general sense, I think in the future people will eventually realize, partly through the presence of apps and things, that they will be launching into spaces rather than pages. Even Facebook wants to become a virtual social world. A social virtual world. I'm rather hoping that they didn't get very fast, because I think they're far more compelling and more, shall I say, acceptable companies to do this for me. But I think we're moving in that direction. I don't think we're all going to wear VR headsets any more than we watch 3D TV incessantly with glasses on. But I think the concept of going into spaces and doing things within spaces and exploring spaces will eventually transcend the idea of just pulling up pages. Pages will possibly be things you pull into the environment you're in. And when that happens, I can see the idea of your home always being available on your devices, yet it's also a gate through to other spaces. Just as your desktop is on your home device, and some of the apps you launch on it are local, but other apps you launch on it online. We don't know what the future holds, but I have a feeling that spatial concept will gradually, start moving into interface design in general, and the way we approach human-computer interfacing. There's a handful. Do you think I'm off kilter?
No. I think it's a definite possible universe. There's a lot of questions as to, things that could make it turn one way or the other, and the question is again scale. Like how big of a, how many people on the planet will be doing it? I don't know. I do think that. To be totally honest, I don't think most people on the planet want to strap boxes to their faces.
No, for sure.
Most people don't want to even put glasses on.
Yeah, I love virtual worlds, but you're not getting me putting them on.
No, it's just until things change around that, then there's a lot of stuff that's not going to happen. I mean, again, kind of coming back full circle to the big news, I think personally, was the closing of AltSpace VR.
Yeah,
it was the forerunner of social VR. 10 or 15 million investment burned through it in 3 or 4 years, I guess. No additional investment. Everyone thinks that social VR is going to totally take off because Facebook bought Oculus, and just because a company wants something to succeed doesn't mean it's going to happen. And there's plenty of examples of people who blew lots of money on things, and just companies that blew lots of money on things and just kind of withered and went poof. And in terms of, maybe it's a very long game that they're playing, but at the same time, well, yeah, okay, long game, fine. But in the short term, there need to be viable companies that exist to advance the technology. You know what I mean? So when companies like AltSpace go and disappear, it's like, well, there you go. It's, all that is lost. I mean, who knows where that intellectual property is going to go, or if it's going to go anywhere. And look at things like Cloud Party, right? Yahoo eats Cloud Party.
Yeah.
As an acquire hire, where they weren't interested in the tech, they were just interested in the people, right? To put them to work on games and things. And that tech, where did that tech go? It's gone. How about Google Lively? Where did that tech go? All that work. all that
Yeah.
be gone. Yeah, Blue Mars,
Yeah.
same thing.
Well,
and so
part of it, of course, is that they weren't in it for a super long haul. They were in it for a limited time haul, and I think the assumption was, with their investors and the company themselves, would be that they have 5 years to impact the mainstream consciousness.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is probably where these things failed.
Well, the problem is that every company will say they're in it for the long haul until they no longer are. Until the money runs out. I mean, and that's just the reality of it. And so I think I guess the point I'm trying to make is just, I think there's a lot of, if you look at something like what happened with All Space VR, it's really, you can't just kind of dismiss it and go like, oh, well, they mismanaged their money or something or whatever. It's like, no, that's a big deal. And you got to, it shows that we're on shaky ground here in terms of any of this stuff really taking off.
It's not in OpenSim, oddly enough, but it's in Second Life that I have occasionally encountered really depressing meetings, kind of where people's subject matter has been along the lines of, what the hell would we do if Linden Lab go out of business? I suppose the feeling in OpenSim is it's never going to happen because it's open source. Somebody will pick up where somebody else stops, and even if the code's not developed, the code at whatever stage it's at will be still viable, and other people may take it up later. Whereas Linden Lab, the company goes, all its products go, and so do the worlds that it owns, and the money people have and time people have invested in them. People who earn decent livings in Second Life, creating and selling virtual goods, they have no fallback if Linden Labs went under. For some reason. Well, let's say, I hope Sansor's going to do well for Linden's because it's on the right track. It's the kind of thing we like to see, even if it's not really compelling with social at the moment. But its failure could have a very bad result for Linden Lab, the company, and its other properties, including Second Life. It might, they will have invested a large amount in Sansar and be banking on recovering that money. And if they don't recover it, then what effect does that have on Second Life? So nothing is safe. It was certainly in the commercial field. What I do think, though, is, people are invested in it. They feel they look at things like that. So, it's never really going to happen, or it would be tragic, But what has been achieved that will never go away, even if Linden Labs went away, is the perception of the thousands of people that use it. It has proved to be workable and doable, and it's proved to be a commercial success. And even if something else were to pull it down, and without Second Life, I'm the first to say that I don't think OpenSim and the Hypergrid would be the success it is, because the starting point with OpenSim is a very, very similar environment to Second Life, so much so that they can share viewers. People knew what they were getting into when they moved into OpenSim from Second Life. And likewise, the Hypergrid just extended that to make I believe OpenSim is now bigger than Second Life, if you think of the Hypergrid as one entity kind of thing. So I think it's the patterns too. I mean, the VR tech, I'm like you. I don't think people are going to be wearing all these headsets and going for this tactile stuff. Sure, hardcore gamers will. And actually, I think it will be really big as an out-of-home experience, where you like going to the arcade and you strap a headset on and you do things out of the home and have multiplayer games in vast warehouses or whatever, where there's space to move. I think that will become big. That's really where the technology belongs because of its the cost of the rigging and everything else. I don't think people are going to be in headsets, to watch their 4K TV, streaming or otherwise, You just want to sit down and relax in front of the screen. You don't want to have to wear 3D glasses, let alone a great big headset, you know. And in fact, if you've got a headset, you might as well not buy the TV because you just bring it straight in. I mean, there are certain things, you know, people respond to change in different ways. The majority of people actually don't like any kind of fast change. Only a few people go with rapid change. But the things that they take on board in terms of change are always those easy things or things that really extend something they do altogether. I mean, mobile phones did not take off because they're portable computers. Mobile phones took off because it was a telephone you could carry around with you and gradually offer more and more things. And it was so obvious that you can get these phones now that you take with you. You know, that was the selling point, the thing that allowed the change to mobile phones to come so quickly. It wasn't the selling point wasn't keep a computer in your pocket. You know, the selling point was have a phone on the go. You know, so you know now, and what I think is probably happening, you know, even if VR, all this high-tech VR technology sort of fails a bit, it has actually, you know, it's brought some of these things into the public focus. I don't see mainstream use, but it's covered in TV dramas. You see reference to here, there, and everywhere. And if something comes along in that field, which is easy to use and access, doesn't require complicated kit, and empowers people to do something that they perceive themselves as already doing, and it only enhances the experience, then I think that spatial metaphor, as it were, will, you know, could take off. But it's got to have that right, the right factor that, you know, is an easy change for people to adopt, because it will be a big change. I've got something. Oh, it's this one bleeping at me. Hang on.
Yeah, I think John had to take a break.
Oh, right. Okay. Fair enough. We were getting some. Were we getting anything else from the channel, by the way? James?
Yeah. We've had a lot of comments coming in from chat. A lot responding to, you know, the idea of ownership. Let's see. You know, some people are still using, for example, their iPod hard drives to store their music, not putting things up in the cloud.
Right.
And another comment about no Macintosh for Sansar, so you won't see me there. That, you know, that's pretty clear, I think. And I think the other comment is to keep an eye on the VR tech. It is going to evolve. It is going to get smaller. And so that could certainly change things.
Yeah,
you know,
sure.
when it becomes less of an encumbrance to work in some of these areas.
Well, for viewers that weren't watching earlier, when we did our weekly Metaworld news highlights, one of the features there was a company bringing out a T-shirt. Basically, it's a shirt which has everything you need to interface. It doesn't have gloves, so your hands are free, and it doesn't have any head component. But the shirt itself will allow you to use your arms and upper body, and, you know, gesture to whatever interface you're using. And I remember quipping on the news that you'll never get me in a headset, and my leap motion doesn't work properly, and those gloves seem a bit heavy. But yeah, I'll wear a T-shirt. You know, because, you know, nobody thinks twice about putting on a T-shirt. I don't really want one with a pattern that looks like something out of the Matrix or the Tron, but, you know, it's the T-shirt itself I'm quite happy to put on. So, as you say, if it, you know, if something that simple comes along, it can be adopted like a mobile phone. And presumably the T-shirts will cost the price of mobile phones. I don't know, but, you know, maybe that would stop me putting it on. But, you know, prices come down.
So, you know, Mel, I'm always cautious about mentioning people's names. I just don't like to, you know, do that without permission, but a lot of comments have been coming from Dark Mistress, also known as Midnight. And so
yes, familiar name.
Yeah,
She's in Second Life, I believe. Yeah. She's in Open Sim too. I don't know. You never know.
Can be any place. You know, so I was thinking about the headset thing versus the augmented reality, and in some ways, if you think about television versus a movie theater, you know that with television it's kind of on in the background. That's something you don't always have to engage in. But when you go to a movie theater, the only thing you're going to do is be in that movie. You're going to have that particular experience, and I do think that's one model for the headset. I mean, if you're going to put on a headset, you're particularly going into a place just to do that experience.
I certainly think that could be big, because you've got the reasonably affluent gamers, let's say, who go after all this kit, for their gaming, and they're hardcore gamers. But even amongst those hardcore gamers, there are people who won't be able to afford all that kit. They just get on with playing their games and escaping into them. But if they go, out on a Saturday night to an arcade in the city centre or something, they will be more than happy to spend their Saturday night money, kind of thing, on strapping on a headset in an arcade and playing a multiplayer game with the people in the arcade. Yeah, I think a lot of the hardware industry is betting on that, to be honest. Even the cinema people who are Hollywood's interest in VR. I mean, they really aren't making much progress on tackling the storytelling side of it, because they really have to come up with a unique way of framing. They need to move back to things like theater to understand how to frame storytelling in VR, rather than think cinema. But on the technological side, you've got massive investment from like the IMAX people who do those vertical seats, big screen things, who see it as a future. And, that technology will certainly enable, it may not be an multiplayer arcade thing. It might just be some kind of cinema you go into that is like a holodeck and features stories told in the surround.
Yep.
So yeah, that tech in itself could lead to a lot of things, over and beyond the idea that everybody will have a helmet to dive into 24 hours a day. Yeah, I tend to agree on that.
Yeah.
Well, obviously some of those issues I'll put to Pathfinder when he returns. Did he say how long he?
Oh, he estimated about 5 minutes.
Right.
One thing that maybe we can turn to if we get to OpenSim, and we talked a lot today about permissions and owning objects and things like that, and the fact that OpenSim is still based on the Second Life permission model, which was a permission model based in a closed garden world.
Yeah.
I've always imagined there ought to be some way with assets, and not being a developer, I can't speak to this really clearly, but I think of the movie Blade Runner, and they looked at some of the genetic creatures. For example, a snake had a little number of the manufacturer in the code, in the biological code, and does OpenSim have the opportunity to create a new permission structure that very clearly identifies who created an object, and it can't be taken by God mode. It can't be, I don't know. I don't know where I'm trying to get, but I think permission is a big part of what Open Simulator needs to address.
I actually very much suspect that I've always felt that the one thing missing in OpenSim is that the permission system in Second Life is probably as robust as it needs to be, because there is no concept of export.
Mm-hmm.
Right? In any real sense. Whereas on the hypergrid, clearly you've got interconnected worlds and stuff, and when you buy something on the hypergrid, like I bought a horse today on DigiWorlds, and it's an NPC horse that you can ride, and you can get an NPC rider to go with you. So it's rather nifty actually, and it makes horse noises, which is always fun. However, back to what was I saying? But the thing is, I bought that because I can't resell it or give it away or copy it for other people, although you can copy a link to people because apparently the creator doesn't want it, is going to be continually updating it and doesn't want people to end up with old models.
Yep.
But I bought it because I knew I could take it back to my own, private simulator and res it and, go horse riding around my sim if I can find. All my spaces are getting very tight and the horse is big, but never mind.
Yeah.
In theory, in the wide open spaces, I can go for a gallop, Now, a product like that wouldn't be possible in Second Life, not only because Second Life's not on the hypergrid, but you can't actually get export permissions that would allow me to buy it in Second Life, then take it out and upload it into another platform. But in some ways, with the hypergrid, that's what you're doing. You're not doing the upload thing because it's all taken care of in your suitcase or your inventory in some cases.
Yeah.
But it's the same sort of concept. Now, for example, if you have something that's marked no export, right? Does it mean no export from the grid you're on, or does it mean no export from the hypergrid network of platforms? Right? That there is no permission that really specifies that. You have to do it with a combination: no copy, no mod, no transfer. And there needs to be kind of, it would be nice if OpenSim supported some additional permissions that were particular to exporting from grids or from hypergrid in general. I mean, for example, I take that horse and I can res it and ride it in every region I actually visit on the hypergrid. Yes, I can, apparently. But what would the creator think if I saved that horse as a DAE file and uploaded it into sine wave space and put different animations into it that work in sine wave?
I can imagine what some owner would think. Someone posted, boy, the chat's active today, which is great. User OpenSim Life said, what I'm talking about with, permissions or identifying an object is DRM, and that's kind of contradictory to the whole point of open source. So it's
it is, but you have to being realistic. People like me and Thursday and Safari and stuff, we're all open source, free for all kind of people. But it's but being realistic, let's face it, OpenSim. But most grids, whatever version of standard OpenSim they're running, most of the big grids have tech guys behind them who tweak that code to their requirements. The code here in the Great Canada Grid and in DigiWorlds and Third Rock Grid is very different from any other hypergrid destinations. I believe they are still running a version of 08, but it is customized by the tech team that run the back end for those grids, which is shared. And the reason I cited those three grids is their tech team is shared. If you sort of see what I mean.
Same Al.
Yeah.
Pathfinder's back, so we could catch him up on this permission discussion, maybe.
Yeah, I'm back.
Yeah.
Had to take care of the dog.
No, you didn't. You were just, I was hogging the limelight, and you thought, right, I'm just...
No, the dog was itching, I swear. She had to...
Yeah, I was going on a bit, so I think actually the break, time for redirection here. Yeah, before we came on the show, well, I'll leave it to James. James actually had some things he wanted to bring up about permissions back in the OpenSim world a bit. But also, while you were gone, he just summarized maybe again some of the points that are raised by viewers who are watching us at the moment. So, James, maybe you'd like to let Pathfinder know the...
Yeah, well, just on the permission, and this goes back to what we were talking about with owning your stuff, basically. And I was asking, I think my question for you actually, Pathfinder, is there anything that Open Simulator could do? And I'm also thinking of the Infinite Metaverse Alliance, the people that are really trying to come up almost with a framework for open source virtual worlds. Is there any kind of permission model structure that could really clearly identify who created an object and its basically its lineage, like a genetic path or something like that. And we had a chat person while we were talking here mention that you're in an open source platform, and that's kind of contradictory to even to digital rights management. But what this idea of owning and recognizing creators and owners is I think a big issue.
Well, okay, so let's see.
A lot in that mix, wasn't there?
There's a lot in that mix. I mean, the trick is you want to have some immutable way, meaning no one can fake it, of proving who owns something.
Yeah.
Tying something to someone's identity, and you want to have this resource be something that can be shared among different virtual worlds, right? So that you kind of have this ledger, a shared ledger that is unforgeable and that can be validated. I bet you there are people in the audience who are going, "Oh, this reminds me of something."
Yes.
You're talking about blockchain tech. You're talking about blockchain technology.
Yeah.
That's what you're talking about. A shared ledger using strong techniques that we don't have the time to go into to talk about, that allow you to basically prove that yes, this person owns this, or this person has created this. And I think that would be kind of interesting to develop some kind of a blockchain technology that is a way to prove ownership of content the same way blockchain, the biggest applications obviously things like, Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies for proving who owns a coin and who are these, identifying ownership in a way that can't be broken, can't be faked, at least not, in our lifetimes, and not and have that be a shared resource that can be leveraged by different virtual worlds the same way, a Bitcoin, the universal blockchain, can be leveraged by any Bitcoin wallet you want to use or what have you.
Yeah.
We've had this discussion before, and in fact, while you were talking there, from the moment James finished his question, I was thinking blockchain.
Right.
Yeah.
But I'm curious. I mean, creating a blockchain system, as it were, how complex is it to do? Is it something that maybe, I won't say OpenSim Core, the devs could do, but is it something that the Hypergrid and the OpenSim now is possibly big enough to collaborate on, bearing in mind it will be a shared resource?
I don't see why not, to be honest. I mean, it's the math behind it is complex, but the concept is pretty darn clear, and there are tons of different cryptocurrencies that pop up using the core code that is, that is available and open sourceable to use, to build your own custom blockchain. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's definitely some engineering work, to code it, but it's not like making something completely from scratch. I mean, the trick would be obviously how do you tailor this to the specific use case of inventory items and content creators and and UUIDs for content, things like that. And but I think that's a very solvable problem. The hard problem's already been solved in terms of how do you build a platform to have a shared ledger that is unalterable and everyone can agree is the word, it is the truth, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say. The truth and unalterable, and cryptocurrencies have already solved that with blockchain tech.
It's almost something. I mean, I almost wish we had Christopher Colosi on because his new Globis currency. I don't know whether that has any kind of blockchain base to it or whether it's.
No, I think that's a different. Yeah, that's a different take. I mean, that's like
Okay. No, we're good.
I think that's a different. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, his system is. What we're talking about is something different than a Federal Reserve Bank type thing we're talking more about a shared. Anyone can look at this shared ledger and prove that Pathfinder Linden built that chair. And there's no way to hide that. And that's the thing too. Like when people talk about Bitcoin and blockchain, like that's the thing too. Nothing is hideable in the blockchain. There's no way. I mean, people use it, for criminal activities all the time. At the same time, though, there's no hiding where the money is going and where it came from. right, in terms of identities. The identities may be completely shrouded in mystery. No one knows who this identifier is, but at the same time, who they are in real life. But at the same time, you could you could claim ownership of an identity on the blockchain and be like, this is very clearly me. I can prove it's me. And here's my real life identity. And I am Pathfinder Learned, and in real life I'm John Lester, and I can prove that I made that share on that blockchain. And it's the same. That's how it works. That's the beauty of it. There are no secrets in terms of who did what with the currency, or in terms of inventory. You could track who owns something over time, even using blockchain tech. You could say, like, Pathfinder Linden was the creator of this chair, and this person was the owner of it, and then they passed it on to someone else, and they passed it on to someone else. And
I think ultimately that, would be a solution. I thought of Chris Colosi, actually, to be honest, because apart from the fact that more and more hypergrid grids are enabling Globits regions, I gather Frederick's Outworlds install, the local grid I was talking about earlier, that will now have an optional Globits facility in the next release. So you'll literally have a Globits account on your desktop. But of course, Globits actually works, unlike, say, Kitely, where the marketplace deliveries and stuff work across the hypergrid. I believe Globits actually works independent of OpenSim or anything else. If you have Globits, you have them in all sorts of places you were to go. It's like having a PayPal account, and you can use it in your local shop, or you can use it to buy online. They make the PayPal, ubiquitous. And I think Globits, would allow you to, for example, earn money in the virtual world in Globits and spend that money in your local, ultimately in a local high street shop. If I don't think you can at the moment, but ultimately that kind of system could evolve. And the blockchain as a security mechanism certainly sounds like a good back end. But there's questions that came up. I mean, one person, while you were taking a quick break, but it sort of started on this. One person mentioned about DRM and digital rights management, that is, and open source not being mutually compatible. But once you put aside some of the feeling I share, a group of, where like a free and open worlds, and stuff, that, commercial grids do run on hypergrid, and they use open source code, and there is nothing to stop them from doing that. The commerce is not written into the OpenSim code. It's simply the platform they start running on. The commerce and all that stuff is stuff that people, commercial grids will put in for themselves. They can enable a currency, a Podex or a Globits if they want, and they can run, they can make commissions on transactions in their grid. Owners can, and people can make money in those worlds. There is nothing wrong with that. If you go around the hypergrid, you will frequently come across places where you can't buy something because you're not a member of that grid and you don't have the currency for that grid, or they don't actually allow export of anything from that grid, even if you do buy it. So there's no point in buying it. So there are sort of things in place there. I don't think the open source nature of OpenSim is. I would prefer everything was totally open, and including any, I'd almost like it if the mandate for using OpenSim required everybody to open source any other piece of code they added to it. But unfortunately, people can add proprietary code on top of OpenSim for their own purposes. They can't mess with the OpenSim component or claim ownership of that. They can only create their own add-ons for their own purposes. But it is quite obvious somebody's going to open up a grid. They're going to use open source code to build it. They're going to make sure it's on the hypergrid and everything else. But then once they've got it online, they're going to try and attract residents to make money. And whether it's making money out of land sales or commissions on the virtual economy, whatever. So the main thing is that the infrastructure is open source. And, you know, if you don't like what somebody does commercially with a grid, then you can jump all over the hypergrid. There are thousands of places you can go without ever going to that grid that you don't like. You know, you're not stuck in it. It's not a walled garden where that grid is essential to everything else. So I'm not too bothered about that side of it. But something back on the news, James and I were having a little back and forth at the end of the news, which really we actually stopped the news because we thought we'd brought to bring the argument here. I think I would just mention the little anecdote from the developers meet that you mentioned, James. They were discussing all sorts of things like meshes, permissions, and all sorts of things going forward. But apparently there was a minor argument in the OpenSim devs group this week about the terminology of God mode and having God rights or God tools or whatever they're called. I don't know whether it was people of a religious disposition wanted to get rid of it, but there was talk about replacing it with something else. And you know, I was, you know, if you need a word as an adjective, you know, it's a pretty good word to describe the top of top, isn't it? You know, it's a word used by multiple religions, so it's not tied to a given religion. It just implies the, you know. And it's a long tradition. I don't think anybody can seriously take offense at the fact that games have gods and, you know, they can operate in God mode. It would seem, you know, rather than talk about and discuss that and figure out whether it can be changed, why not do something that we can use, please, that is meaningful? But coincidentally, on my own private grid, where I obviously can switch to God mode, I have noticed that if you take ownership of something, which I would not as a rule do because you literally could be breaking DRM or whatever. But something that doesn't happen with God mode is the creator does not change. The ownership changes, but even a God mode operator cannot change the creator. The only time that sometimes changes is if you've saved an OAR file and then reload it from scratch somewhere else, because OAR files, when they're imported, seem to assume the whole content was created by whoever's uploading the OAR file. So that's a glitch. But simply having God powers does not allow you to make yourself the creator of something you didn't create. The creator's identity apparently stays intact. And I think that, you know, that's the level that really needs to be protected, the creator. Because if it is something people pay for or has restricted rights and stuff, then if that element, the creator element, is governed by, you know, a blockchain ledger or something, then you know, I would think it's easy enough for the other permissions to be too. But you know, that was seen to be a pretty foolproof way of what would really be considered perpetual rights in his creation. So a creator can sell all the rights he's has as a creator, he or she. But usually the creator remains the creator. It's the person who created it. And so long as that is secured and can't ever be changed, then everything else can should be able to be tracked down the line, I would have thought. So my
Pathfinder, are you losing Mal's audio?
Yeah, I just lost his audio.
Okay, yeah, me too.
Oh,
right.
I heard him.
1 2 1 2.
Yeah, it's almost like your level might be dropping a bit.
1 2 1 2. Okay.
You're back now, so.
Okay, was I cutting out, or did you lose or everything I said? I think Skype was probably censoring me.
Yeah, that's what it is.
I mentioned the G word. I probably mentioned the G word. So.
Oh, speaking of that, in chat, someone suggested the term HBIC. Does that bring up any connotation for you? Head bitch or bastard in charge.
Oh, right, yeah.
When I was at Linen Lab, I remember we had conversations about calling something God mode, and uh, it was one of those things where it's just been, since the beginning, and it's always been called that. And it was always, it originally came from gaming, right? Because in game worlds, you talk about God mode, and in video games, you go into God mode. That's what they call it. There's a key combination you type it to go into God mode in any of these first-person shooter games, so that you are indestructible or have infinite ammo, and it's always the same. It's called God mode, and so that's why they always stuck with it. But at one point, we had internal discussions for if we were going to rename it, what would we call it? And I remember I suggested janitor mode, because that's the reality of it, right? When you go into God mode, it's not like I'm going into God mode to do some awesome celestial something. It's more like I got to go into God mode because I got to fix the goddamn permissions on this thing, and I can't delete this, and I got to go in, and it's always some kind of janitorial scraping gum off of the floor kind of thing.
That's profound. That's profound.
So it's really janitor mode. It's like when I go into God mode, I feel like I'm putting on some gloves and scraping gum off of the undersides of desks or something. It's like, there's only one way to get it off here, and I go into God mode and force permissions to me, and I delete it, or something like that.
Yeah.
Janitor mode. Yeah.
Yep.
Get your hands dirty.
Oh, have we lost Mel?
That's maybe.
Yeah.
Oh no.
Oh, entirely we've lost Mel. All right.
Poof.
Well,
he went into God mode.
He did.
He's gone to another dimension.
I see a reconnection here. Pathfinder, have you been following this Infinite Metaverse Alliance? I think kind of trying to step up to what was going to be a foundation for OpenSim.
Yeah, I followed it a little bit, but I have to be honest, I haven't really followed it that closely. I mean, I think the concept is great, and I should actually follow it more, because I'd love to help out however I can, if I can, or whatever, or just be aware of what they're talking about. But I think the concept is good. It's just unfortunately I haven't been on the ball following it.
Well, there's only so much time in the day.
Yeah. But what's the most recent things that they've been up to? I don't even.
Well, I think they're still working on really an essential structure of what the group can be, but they've set up test grids to run varieties of open simulators for people to work against. They received a little bit of funding to help set up hosting, and now they're focusing on creating working groups in a really pretty wide variety of topics. From things from inventory, assets, pay systems, and so.
That sounds great.
The working group approach, I mean, it does seem to make a lot of sense, and I think it'll just take some time to see if it gels and gets key contributors involved with it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the danger of where OpenSim is right now, is that it is open source, and it's like, who's leading this ship, and what are we, if everybody's pulling in all different directions, what's going to happen? And I think anything that can help surface a clear consensus about what we should be doing and why, and making the motivations very clear as well. We're designing this way because of this. I think it's all about communication and sharing the what and the why and the how very publicly, and having consensus and discussion, and at the same time not having too much of that, having some resolution so that you can actually then execute, right? Because the danger is you could just sit around discussing the what, why, and how forever and never actually do anything.
Mm-hmm.
Never actually build anything. So making sure that developers are part of that conversation and that are plugged into it, so that there's very clear consensus around, okay, we're going to do it this way because from these discussions we've learned that we think this is the right way to do it, and this is the why behind what we're deciding to do, and this is the how, and this is exactly what we're going to do, and now we're actually going to have developers doing it.
Yeah.
And if you can pull that all together, I think that would be fantastic.
Well, and it is something that is, I mean, I look at it in kind of a large view of human activity in general, and how do you get a diverse group of people to agree on a direction. And you know, I think as a worldwide culture, we still struggle with that. You know, what is an effective way to you know, move a complex system forward?
Well, I mean, especially if there just are, you know, multiple valid different perspectives that are just different perspectives, and it's like where you will have to agree to disagree. And how do you get over that?
Right.
Because at the end of the day, what we're talking about is building things, right? We're not talking about a philosophical discussion about DRM. We're talking about how can we implement things that make sense, that will actually work for people.
Yep.
Right. And so this is software development at the end of the day, and that means it's actual product development, which means you're going to have to make something, and you're going to have to make. People are going to have to take ownership of different areas, and people are going to have to agree to disagree, but at the same time decide to move forward. And as long as everyone's very clear about the reasons why, you know, people, I think it can work out. But it's definitely a challenge from a, you know, product and project management perspective.
Absolutely. So it looks like Mel's back online, and I wonder if I need to add him to this conversation. I'm not an adept user of Skype.
Let me see. I can add him. I can do it.
I'm right-clicking everything I can find.
I'm adding him.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Let's see.
Actually.
Oh, did I do something wrong?
No,
wait a minute.
He uses a different account.
Oh, the Malburns that I selected is.
Yeah.
I actually had selected 2 of them.
I hear something.
Yep, have you got me back?
There it is.
There he goes. There he goes. I got him.
I lost internet connectivity for a while. I thought the router was updating, but then who knows? I had to unplug it, and it's rebooting now, and wireless still isn't on. But yeah, it's booting while we speak. So yeah, sorry about that, folks. Hope you had a good conversation while I was gone.
Yeah, we're totally talking about you.
That's right.
It's okay.
I also need to bring my avatar back into my seat, don't I?
Well, we're at about 2 hours. What do you think?
Oh, right. Are you still? Are you live at the moment still?
Yes, we are. Yep.
Oh, right. Okay. So that carried on uninterrupted. Yeah. Okay. Well, I should better get back in anyway. But I will be sat there to say goodbye to folks.
Well, and
yeah.
I can catch up on our conversation. I was asking Pathfinder about the IMA and about you know, guiding this complex thing that is Open Simulator.
Indeed.
Which the devs are doing, but you know, I think IMA can provide at least some input.
Yeah, I think the thing about IMA, if you have you had any contact with Pathfinder?
No, not really. No, I haven't had a chance to.
I think you'd actually appreciate it. They if you're around at about, you're Eastern, aren't you?
Correct.
Like James. So I think it's what time is it? It's about 4:30 on Wednesday. They have an open meet.
Yeah. Yep.
Might well be worth coming to. I think it'll really interest you. That I think the thing about them is, and I don't think some of the devs have quite clicked on this at the moment, because they come out of wanting to address disability issues and accessibility issues, and you know, and education a little bit, but mostly they want to sort of thoroughly test everything, and you know, they focus on the idea of putting together people in working groups. And sometimes you get, for example, there is a web viewer working group, and it contains people from, I believe, 3 different web viewer projects. And they're not competing with each other or putting each other down. The idea is it's a conversational place. But the other thing that they are pretty adamant about is that in the conversation and in what they do, they represent the end user, not the devs. Even though many, dev type people are involved for obvious reasons, what can be solved, what can't be. Oh dear, I've logged into the wrong grid. Sorry. Yeah, this was inevitable, wasn't it? I launched Firestorm, and of course it goes to another grid. Right, swapping over. But they do really like to feel that they, they're looking around at what users want, things that need to happen, as it were, to people who are using the platform, rather than the things that the devs might want to add or drop from the platform or do to the platform, if you see what I mean. And in that sense, I think they're getting quite a lot of traction. They seem to be noted. There's certainly been, James, I think, will confer that the vanilla open sim core group, as it were, have noticed them and discussed them now and again, and they are referenced a lot by other people, and people like Thinker and Melville are heavily involved with them too. In terms of initiating working groups and pushing things. Leah Lobo is in there a lot of the time. Delightful Dewaggle, Barbara, I guess, is in there too. And somebody who's actually there quite often is, although he no longer works for the military in Moses, Doug, isn't it?
Doug Maxwell.
Doug Maxwell. Yeah. So there's a lot of people there turning up, I think a lot of them just enjoy the discussion, but in some cases, someone will come along and they're able to, contribute something or make suggestions. And I've quite often been sitting there actually, and I'm almost like an observer, and I'll come in with a few comments now and again, and that would trigger something else, and before I know it, they've formed a working group to tackle something before that. So. Yeah, I think it's actually sufficing, although it's a fairly small core group at the moment, as a good discussion forum. But I gather that, there are a lot of people involved on working groups and doing things who aren't necessarily at that meeting I mentioned. It tends to be the core guiding group at that, but it's open, and I'm sure if you turned up, you'd be most welcomed.
Oh, cool.
It's a non-committal thing. They do have. I'm actually on their. I think it's called the advisory board, and then they have a separate board which is like an admin board. They're a bit into their boards and stuff. But it's procedural, but it's not. It doesn't appear to be invasive in what anybody else is doing, and in fact, it seems to be a very good place to be on top of what everybody else is doing. Because if somebody's doing something and they're not there, the chances are somebody else is there, doesn't know what's happening.
Gotcha. Cool.
So I think they're doing good work. It's the first thing for a long time outside just a dev team, core devs and stuff and various projects that. I think could signpost a conversation towards the future, and they're focused on OpenSim and the hypergrid, although they're testing a lot of things like Halcyon and various other engines. They're just doing a lot of robust testing to see what works best and what offers best and stuff, and. And they're not excluding themselves from other virtual world platforms either. Not that they're including them at the moment, but it's if somebody for example from space wanted to turn up and talk about interoperability, if doubtful would happen, but they would be open to things like that too. So. I think it's a good bunch of people who've collected an equally good bunch of people around them.
Oh, cool. I'll definitely check it out.
So Mal, I was awfully tempted to end the show while you were gone.
I bet you were. I mean, without me, I was actually panicking because I think I was hosting the call.
Right.
And I suddenly thought, shit, if I've gone offline, the call would have dropped mid-show.
That kept going. It was pretty good.
But it kept going, so that was good, right? So our viewers will not have been overly distressed, apart from the utter shock of me disappearing from my seat.
Just vaporizing. Yep.
Vaporizing on the spot. Okay, well that's yeah, that's good to go. That applies to all of you listening, by the way. If you are around, now I can't remember the Pacific time for it. Hang on, 4:30 Eastern is 7:30 Eastern. That would be Pacific. Is that, am I right?
No.
IMA? No.
Backwards, 1:30 Pacific.
1:30 Pacific. Okay. Yeah. So if any of you are interested in the IMA, which stands, by the way, for Infinite Metaverse Alliance, it's that particular meeting is always open, and you never know. You may say something and get wound into 100 other meetings. You know, it's up to you. But yeah, drop in and find out what's going on, and if you feel like you've got anything to contribute. And I think they are very, very interested in hearing, participation from end users who, it's us who use it day in and day out that know what the problems with the platform are. And that message does get through to the devs, but not all the messages get through, and it doesn't mean. And often the devs have different things on their agenda. They're more, there's something in the back end they want to fix more urgently than something on the front end. Yeah. So, things like that. You can get your views sort of heard. Safari is still on vacation for the summer, so no news there. If you were watching last week, of course, we had the folks from the Avatar Festival here, and I've kept a sign up behind us. That won't actually be to September, but I think you have 1 day left. I think it was August the 15th. Was the closing day for you to put in to have a pitch there, a booth or a pitch, or if you want to show off what you're doing, strictly non-commercial, you can apply for a space at that festival. And 15th will be Tuesday, I believe, so you're really going to have to act quick if you want to get in on that, so to speak. And yes, hopefully we will be rebooting OSCC for this year very shortly, so we'll have some news on that, though we haven't yet managed to start the reboots because Skype has deleted our organizational groups. Go figure. But yeah, that'll be sorted sometime this week too, no doubt. Right. Any other closing thoughts, James? Did anything from the channel that didn't come up, or any closing thoughts from you?
No, not really. We had just such an active chat. It's really wonderful. Nice to have that feedback.
Right. Yes, indeed. I mean, some weeks, it's as dead as a dodo on the live channel, and all the comments come in a week. Yep. But live ones, yeah, great. Yep. We can respond to them, you see.
Indeed.
Okay, so Pathfinder. Just before I ask anything else, I've gotten anything else. What are you kind of engaged with at the moment? Last time we spoke, you were quite heavily involved in what we would call level design, for various things, public and non-public, so to speak. Is that still your main focus at the moment, or is anything new popping up?
Yeah, I mean, that's still my area of interest in virtual worlds in general, and I think, and again, just trying to see where things are going with the social aspects, in particular of VR, primarily VR focused platforms like Sansar.
Yeah.
Just want to see, if I'm not working directly on them, at least I can be giving people feedback, maybe help.
Sure.
Help things move in a good way, and because at the end of the day, all these pretty things are nice, but if they're not full of people and the people are in them and they can't talk to each other, then everyone's just kind of walking through museums alone.
Yeah.
So that's just keep getting involved in that.
I've often thought that I look at something like it's not a conversation, but I'll just say it briefly. Something like Sansar. Imagine it was kind of like set up like a mirror world, and it was a place you could go to experience a virtual recreation of something in the real world, like Nebadon has put the Grand Canyon in space at real size. It takes 6 hours to walk across it. That would be a kind of bona fide solitary experience, just as I quite often like to find somewhere virtually to park myself and meditate and get on with stuff without other people around me. But at the same time, I want to go to meetings and have chats and go on safaris and things like that. So it's a bit like the way we behave in the real world. We use various things to put us in the mood for meditation, and we use other things to put us, to pump us up and get us out exploring. The social agenda in these worlds is vital, because that's how you collaborate, and a creator can't create unless they're inspired by other creators and collaborate and things. So it's a vital part of it. So but the idea of lonesome spaces is not without its merits, but it's not. It's to visit and see something. When that is all there is to do. If it's an exciting experience visually, then fine. But, as you say, Sansar looks great. There are a couple of regions there that when you've waited half an hour for them to load, they actually look spectacular. And you can actually spend a while there admiring them. But, once you've seen it, it's like been there, done that. Next time I go back, it's to go with a friend or have a chat with somebody, And if that doesn't happen... Oh, and you can't sit on anything sittable either. That's a bit of a dilemma. Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. So any final thoughts other than that before we call it a wrap?
No, I guess hope to see folks continuing to explore all these different platforms and, keep moving forward.
Yeah, despite our slight pessimism at some points today, I think we're in exciting times. We might have lost old space VR and stuff and be apprehensive about helmets, but there's a lot going on and a lot of new stuff coming along, which is really in our sphere of reference. So okay, well, I'd like to thank everybody today. Thank James, of course, also multitasking on our cameras. Thank you, James.
Oh, absolutely. And just the comments are wrapping up, and a couple of comments about high fidelity. The fact that it's may not be as pretty as Sansar, but it's got the building tools, it's got the social interaction. So, and I personally have I've guarded hopes for hi-fi as well. I come from an educational background, so I'll be watching where the educators go.
Yeah, for sure. And that is very true. And of course, high fidelity comes with your own sandbox on your own computer, just to mention that. Right. Okay. And also the Pathfinder, John Lester, of course. Thank you very much, Pathfinder. It's been great having you again.
Oh, my pleasure.
You're always welcome. But we managed to pretty much fill up a show here. So.
Oh, it was a lot of fun. Thanks a lot.
Great stuff. Okay, so from me, I'll just wish you all a very good morning, a very good afternoon, a very good evening, and indeed a very good tomorrow, depending on wherever, and more importantly, whenever you are. And we'll be back next week. See you then. Bye for now.